Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us today for this webinar. Hope you're well. My name's Terry. I am the event manager for Renaissance and Geo Education. I really appreciate you joining us live today. We will be starting at about 1:30, so we have got a few minutes before we start. So I just wanted to share some housekeeping with you so you know how we're using, what interactivity we are using in today's session. So just a reminder, you will be muted when you arrive. You will not be able to unmute yourself, but you will be using some interactivity today. So I'll touch on that in just a few minutes' time. We will be recording this session and an email will be sent in the coming days with all the details, the presentation and the recording of today's session. As I mentioned, we will be doing some interactivity today. Do tell us where you're joining us for in chat. And if you wouldn't mind, it does default to hosts and panelists, but if you can change that to everyone, that would be great. There's a little box that says to change that to everyone, and everyone can see everyone else's messages. So do use that, please, and use that for observing of anything that's happening in today's session. Tell us where you're joining us from. As I said, I'm coming from the UK today, but do write in the chat where you're joining us from today. That would be great. And the Q&A you find at the bottom of your box. If you click on Q&A, if you have any questions you'd like to ask, do use the Q&A box so we can manage those effectively. We are expecting quite a high number of people today, so we will do our best to answer as many questions as we can. But if we do run out of time, we will follow up on those questions we didn't manage to get through. So do use the Q&A for all your questions today, and the chat for anything else. That would be great. I just wanted to quickly touch on an event that we're holding in Dubai. You may have seen this already if you haven't. If you've joined some of these previous sessions, on the 14th of November, we do have a conference in Dubai, so do look out for that. I've just put the QR code on, and there are still some spaces available. So if you haven't had a chance, you'd like to know more, please do visit the QR code, and you can get some more information from there. And although I don't expect you to complete this now, we will be wanting your feedback. We do take this, all the information that's given to us on board, so I appreciate if you wouldn't mind. It will also pop up at the end of today's session, so don't worry about dropping this down. I will add the link also in the chat function after today's session, but you've also got a QR code. But do give us your feedback. We do really appreciate any feedback, so we can take those on going forward. And if you do forget anything or have any queries going forward, please use the links here to get in contact with us for any sort of future events. Okay, we will, as I mentioned, for those that are still joining us now, we are starting at 1:30, so we will be starting in just a couple of minutes' time. We appreciate you joining us live today. I will be handing over to our presenters shortly, but as I mentioned, for those that have just started to join us, you will be muted when you arrive. And the event is being recorded, but it will be sent so you can see see the recording, share with colleagues, and that will be sent in a couple of days. So just bear that in mind. As I've mentioned already, do tell us where you're joining from in chat. We'd love to hear from you. As I mentioned, I'm here from the UK, so my colleagues are in the UK as well. And I know Dr. Funke is based in the UAE, so do tell us where you're joining us from. And if you are writing in chat, just make sure it's defaulted to everyone. If you do need to speak just to panelists directly, you can change it back to hosts and panelists. But if you're just general chit chat, please do use the everyone section. There's a little two box and you can drop it down to everyone. The Q&A is also for any questions, so we can manage those effectively. I would ask you that you put all your questions in the question and answer box, please, so we can manage those effectively. We are expecting quite a high number of people today, so I would ask that you get those questions in, and we'll try our best to get through every question as efficiently as possible. And if we can't get through to everyone's question, we will follow up after today's session with your answers. Excuse me. And as I mentioned, we are hosting a conference in the UAE in November, so do take a look at that. I've just put the QR code there so you can have a look at the details of that conference there. And I will be getting you to do some feedback, so do appreciate any feedback that can be given by using this link here, but it will pop up at the end of today's webinar. So just if you could take a couple minutes just to complete that, that would be great. Okay, we are hitting the past now mark, so I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm now going to hand over to our presenters today, Emily, Dr. Funke, and Laura.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It's wonderful to have so many of you with us for what promises to be a fantastic webinar. I, for one, am very excited to listen to our guest speaker today. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself and Emily. We are both international education advisors working as part of GL Education and Renaissance, both former teachers ourselves, and we are thrilled to be joined by our fantastic guest speaker for today's webinar. Dr. Funke is a corporate head of wellbeing for GEMS Education. We're delighted to have you with us today and very excited to hear you talk about assessment and student flourishing. So I will hand over to our lovely guest, Dr. Funke. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Can you hear me clearly?
Can, yeah.
Fantastic. I will start to share my screen. So good afternoon to you all. My name is Dr. Funke Baffour-Awuah, and I'm the Corporate Head of Wellbeing of GEMS Education. And I'm really honoured today to talk to you about something that's really passionate for me, and that is wellbeing. And for some time now, I've been looking at wellbeing in terms of the evidence that we can use to support student flourishing. So my presentation today is to give you a case study about what we've been doing at GEMS Education. And so I'll just go on to the next slide. But I just want us to reflect when we're thinking about well-being. If you could just take a moment, I presume that most of you are educators, and if you reflect on your own experiences with your student, how do you feel it's impacted them, maybe positively or maybe not? And when we're thinking about the whole concept of student well-being and the success, what's happening in your schools that you can see that is supporting student well-being, or maybe there's some things that are happening that are not helping students to flourish. I mean, we can't have the conversation now, but it's just something to reflect on whilst I go through this course of the presentation. And I want to give you a bit of a background about myself. I started off as a clinical psychologist in the United Kingdom, and I was in practice for a number of years. And then 12 years ago, I decided to move into education because what I was seeing in my practice was adults were struggling, and most of the struggle came from their childhood, and whether it was bullying, friendships. And I thought, what if we can get into that space in the educational space and start talking about mental health? And this was 12, 13 years ago. And I remember I got a lot of pushback and nobody wanted to talk about mental health. It was too much of a stigma. And I think one of the greatest things that I'm seeing now is, particularly being in the UAE, is the willingness to talk about well-being and to put it as a strategic focus. I'm sorry if you can hear the background noise, but I'm still in the school setting. So now the turning point is we can see many of our students, and this image really tells a lot, that they can give us the most beautiful smiles. Some of them are able to express how they're feeling, but there's also those students who don't express how they're feeling, give us the smiles on the outside, but really on the inside, they're really struggling. And let's think about how many of your students in your schools are smiling on the outside and struggling on the inside. And the reason why I bring this to mind is, you know, in 2023, UNESCO brought out some evidence and research and some stats, and they said that 1 in 5 children globally have a mental health challenge. They're not saying they're having some anxious thoughts, which we all have, but a mental health challenge. And in my world, that means a mental health diagnosis. And that was 2.5 years ago, and we know things are changing. And why is this happening? Many people are saying, is it because of the pandemic? Is it because it's many factors? Yes, the pandemic has had an impact in terms of speeding up what was already going to happen. But our young people are faced with so many challenges. Think about how many wars are going around the world, how they have to conceptualize that. In my lifetime as a child, or teenager, young adult, I didn't know about any wars, but they've seen so much going on, so much trauma, and this is having an impact on how they see themselves, as well as the advancement of technology, AI, social media, and on top of that, the pandemic. So when we see these stats, it's not for us to push it away. It's for us to take note and see, well, what can we do to help our students to flourish? And what I've seen in education is that we're not, I think we're moving on. I don't want to say it in a negative way at all. But what I've seen in the past is that we have to challenge the outdated ideas of success in education. You think about it, you're in education and all you want to look at is the grades. So you're looking at students as a statistical number in terms of what grades are they getting. The ones that are flourishing, they're doing extremely well, the ones that are not, what do we do to support? That's all great. But one thing that we're doing at GEMS Education, which I'll introduce to you a bit more about us, is we're putting well-being first. We're using well-being data to tell our story before we focus on the attainment data. In GEMS Education, we have 48 schools and over 140,000 students. You know, currently we are the largest K-12 private schools around. And, you know, we have 4 core elements of values, but one of them I want to share is our care, how much we care and how much care is centralized. And we have a commitment to well-being in terms of my role as the corporate head to look at the strategy of well-being in all of our schools. And you think about how many students we have. And one of the things we noticed was we cannot be looking at data in the way that we have been looking at data. We now need to start looking at well-being data. Now, what you'd be thinking, well, how do you capture well-being data? And what I realized in the past in capturing well-being data, it's okay to say we're doing a student well-being survey and we're using that data, but is it evidence-based? So I know in the past we used different data sets, but what was it showing us? And I remember there was a time when this was before I worked at GEMS, I was working in a school and it was just around a pandemic. And I remember we had a cohort of students that really struggled with their mental health. And it was mental health in the case of that one had to go into a psychiatric ward, one had to extend their time in school. And I remember thinking we failed those students because we were not able to see these signs. It was like we became reactive rather than proactive. And this is where I want us to think about now is how do we go from practice to strategy? If I was to ask you, what are the well-being initiatives you have in your school? What are the well-being programs? You might give me a whole list of things, which is great. You know, in some schools, they do dog therapy and it's absolutely fantastic. Or we might have seating options, or we might do some art therapy. There's a lot of well-being initiatives or practices in school. But how do we turn that to strategy? And that's the beautiful thing that I want to talk about, what we've been doing at GEMS. Now, many of you may not have heard of it, but one of our early identifiers that we are using is the PAS. And PAS stands for Pupil, Attitudes, and Self and Regard. So it's letting us see those barriers to learning when students might not be able to say. So you remember one of my first slides, we had the student smiling, but in the inside, that student wasn't smiling. So it's turning those invisible struggles into visible data. So whenever I'm mentioning the past, I want you to think about there are invisible struggles that a student face. For us, we look at past in giving us data in the 3 areas. So that's basically students' attitudes to themselves, students' attitudes to their study, and students' attitude to school. So you're getting a sense of what they're feeling on the inside out. And what I mean by that, to their self is about their identity, to their study it's about their learning, and to their school is about the sense of belonging. And that might be something you were hearing lately about how do we assess belonging. And this is what we have realized with the past. It's been able to give us data that we have been able to utilize as an early identifier so that we're able to intervene. So let me share what we've been doing so far. So the other slide was, sorry, I went a bit fast. It's just letting what PAS is able to do it's listen to students' needs. And we're doing that effectively. It's enabling us to create interventions. We look at the scores, and the scores will let us know, is this a fragile learner? Now, I know that Emily will talk about that later on, but let me put it into the context, what we've utilized in terms of the data that we've been able to capture. Now, don't get all phased with when I'm showing you these data sets, but I just want to give you a snapshot. So this is how we have our dashboard. So this is I'm giving you 3 cases of a student. So initially, we didn't have PASS as a focal point on our dashboard. So anytime we click into the student and we're looking at the attainment, we now have got the well-being, which we call the PASS, as the first point of call. When you look at this, and if anyone that's into data sets, they will understand, this looks like a student who is really doing well. She's thriving academically. But if you notice, there's some dips. And some dips is that she's actually disconnected from her learning, even though she is thriving. Now, if we didn't do the PASS, we would have never have known that. And why this is so important for us is I've seen students time and time again, they're thriving really, they're doing well, they're getting the grades, if it's the 9s, if it's the 8s, then they get to that tender age, maybe that might be when they're in grade 10, 11, 12, and there's a dip. But what we've noticed is that if we start looking at the PASS as early as possible, we can see that there could possibly be a dip, because you never know that this student is disconnected because they're doing so well. And this is one case study. Let me give you another one. So you look at this student and it's evident. So with the PASS, you see, like when we've got the green, it means it's going well, but you can still have it to a point where you need to pay attention. This student's PASS is low. The scores are showing us. It's an alarm bell for us to say this student is at risk. Despite them having an average age reading, if we was looking at the attainment and not looking at the PASS, but there's a strong decline in motivation. And that's what our grades don't show us. It doesn't show us that this person is lacking in motivation. But when you merge the PASS with the other attainment data that you're trying to capture, you're able to tell more of a story. Remember, all of our students, they have a story behind them. And it's how are we going to use that data to tell the story? And this is why PASS has been so pivotal for us in telling the story behind the smiles. And there's another one I want to show. This is another case study. Now, this student, as you can see, there's a decline. You see this dip. Now, if we didn't do the PASS, we wouldn't really know the dip. We can see the dip there and there, and you're thinking, okay, what's going on here? And this PASS highlights a complete, and this student was under a lot of emotional distress, had a low self-regard to themselves, didn't have any good feelings about school, and didn't feel they belong. And after we were able to work with this student and understand what was going on for them, they had so many different transitions in their life. Parents were going through quite a messy divorce. And if we didn't capture that data there, we would not have been able to dig deep. And this is why I'm an advocate, because I believe about if we don't identify early, then we are going to run the risk of being reactive. Now, if there's anything as educators that we need to shift away from, is being reactive. We don't say, okay, I work in the UAE, and if, the UAE, we have KHDA. If KHDA are bringing in new initiatives, we should be advanced, further ahead. KHDA are giving us the guidelines that we should be further ahead of that in these fields. And what tends to happen is that schools ruffle up, let's do this initiative, let's do that initiative, but then there's not the culture. So if we want to change the culture from the school, for our schools, for our student, for our environment, we need to be very on point in understanding our community. When you see this student here, they don't feel accepted. So we know we've got to do something with the culture. And culture is a very big piece in the school setting. If we want to eliminate bullying in a way that, when students feel that they belong. If I was to ask you, how do you know if your students belong? The dream that I have is that we just ask them one question and we say, do you feel you belong? And that alone will let us know what type of culture we're creating for our students. So now that you use the PASS, because you can use the PASS once or twice a year, and what we tend to do is use it once a year and then twice a year for those students who are considered fragile learners. So now that we have the PASS data, so what do we do with that? So then we might go in and dig deep and use some other tools. So this particular school, we had 3,500 responses in one of our schools. And really, a lot of them said that they were happy because we're able to intervene after getting the results from the PASS. But there was something else that was missing. They said that they were happy, but they felt saved, but the significance was actually missing. So students' voice, it's not just a value, it's the accountability tool. And that aligns with the PASS score. Remember I told you it's the 3 S's and the one with the score, we did see a lower rating in that aspect. So we were able to triangulate the data and say, okay, this is related to what we saw in the PASS. We dug deep, we did another form of survey assessments, and this is what it showed us. So then we're thinking, well, what do we need to do now? As we can see, this is coming up in our data set. Now, our chairman, Mr. Sunny Varkey, I think, we always call him a genius, but the reality is that he puts values. He states it very clearly that values will guide students through life. Now, he's not saying that you have to do all your academics to the highest standard and that's all that matters. Yes, we have a world-class curriculum that we're striving towards, but he's also saying that we need to make sure we create a value-led education. And you might be thinking, what would that look like? So we just launched last year one of our main value-led education, the first of its kind. So we created a strategy and we looked at the framework of how could we bring values to our students' life. So we created a program that is based on 13 values. Because we're in the UAE and with the respect that we have, we also create the values that relate to Ramadan. So it's our special value. So there's 13 values that we look at about leadership. Now, it's not like your normal leadership program. This is more about leading from the inside out. So if we want to create that value-led education, we have to help our young people develop those skills that they are seeing themselves. So tied into the PASS self-regard, if they have values for themselves within, we will see the scores on the PASS self-regard rise. So we're looking at reflection. And obviously, the beauty of GEMS education, we call it gemstones. So it's called leadership gemstones. And if you didn't know, there's over 200 gemstones, and we chose 13 gemstones that relate to the values that we created. So our students go through this program every single week. They have a quote, they have key questions, and we're able to see how they are buying into this. They've taken over this framework into such beautiful ways. And we've also got a new program called Beyond 100, which I hope I can talk about that another day. And this is it. This is what we're doing. And this is how we've gone from a small scale of trying to see what's going on and developing programs and interventions and strategies. And maybe there's one question I'll ask you, or maybe there'll be a few questions, but just reflection. If you were to embed a well-being first framework in your school setting and it was tomorrow, what would your first 3 steps be? Because I look in hindsight, and maybe you can put it in the chat or we can talk after, but if I look back and think, oh, wow, we always say that if we know what we know now, what we would have done then, but it's simple. What we need to do now is keep things simple, effective, and intentional. And I'm going to finish there because I know that I can talk about this for a while, and I want to make sure that Emily and Laura have the space. So I want to hand over. Thank you so much for listening to me, and look forward to any questions you have. Hand over to Emily and Laura. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Funke. That was so interesting, and such an interesting perspective, like you said there, of rather than being reactive, really monitoring that well-being from such an early age so that we can have that real impact. So thank you. That's so valuable to have that insight. And obviously you've been there and done it in your schools, and you know the impact that it's having for your students. So hopefully for other schools that'll be really inspiring, and they can take some really valuable insight from that. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. I'm just going to share my screen with you so that we can kind of follow on from there. I'm just going to pop that onto full screen for you. Fabulous. So during that session, you will have heard Dr. Funke mention a few times about our PASS survey. And as she rightly mentioned, that stands for Pupil Attitudes to Self and School. So we're just going to tell you a little bit more about the PASS survey. If you're using it, then it may be a nice refresher. If you're not, then it may be providing you with a little bit more information. And we will put a poll up in a little while just to get some insight as to if you would like any further information or further support, then we can offer you that following today's session as well. But first of all, just a little bit more information on our PASS survey. So as I mentioned before, it is Pupil Attitudes to Self and School. So this is a digital survey and can be used with students aged 4 to 18. And the PASS survey was originally developed by educational psychologists, and it really focuses, as Dr. Funke mentioned there, on those attitudinal barriers to learning, and can really help us to identify any underlying issues that might be preventing a student from reaching their full potential. And as Dr. Funke mentioned, quite often these may be students that are presenting as, really happy, big smiles on their faces, etc. And we don't ever get to know what's going on behind that mask without such a survey. So it's really, really insightful. And I really enjoy kind of doing our consultations with school where we look through your data with you, because it's so interesting when staff say, I never knew that student was feeling that way. And when you have that information available, you're really able to then, take that information and support the students in the right way. So PASS takes about 15 to 20 minutes to complete, and the results can be used to help you, as I said, to identify and monitor students' feelings regarding themselves as learners, and also their feelings about school itself. As part of the PASS assessment, you will also have access to our interventions toolkit, which we'll take a little look at in a little bit more detail in a moment. But this fantastic resource will allow you to start to address any issues immediately. And we will show you kind of what you can find within that toolkit and how best to use it. There's a little bit more information on the screen there in terms of the 9 factors that the survey focuses on. So those are on the screen for you there, but that is a basic summary of what our PASS assessment is and why schools find it so valuable. In the information from Dr. Funke as well, you heard her mention about fragile learners. If you're thinking to yourself, I don't know what fragile learners is, and I would like to know a little bit more, then I'm pleased to say that Emily is going to talk us through how you can use your PASS data alongside your ability data, such as CAT4, to identify those fragile learners, to tell us what our fragile learners are. And yeah, I'll hand over to Emily. Thank you, Emily.
Thanks, Laura. So as has been mentioned already, it is crucial that schools don't just focus on academic potential and attainment, but also take in those attitudinal factors that can influence performance. So we've got tools like our CAT4 and our PASS that we're speaking about today, and they're really valuable when they're used together. So they help us to see not just what people can do, but actually how they're feeling about their learning. And it's a really effective way to then to start to analyse data against your perceived learning capability, which is one of the factors from the survey. So you can see on the screen here that we have a quadrant, and there are 4 broad groups. So firstly we have the blue quadrant. So those are the pupils with both high attainment and high perceived learning capability. So these learners have confidence in their abilities and they are likely to reach their full potential. We have the yellow quadrant, so those are children with lower scores for both attainment and perceived learning capability. So these pupils really will benefit from that early identification and targeted support, like mentoring, and build their skills and their confidence. We have the purple quadrant, which is actually a really interesting group of students. So these are pupils who have a strong belief in their own ability, so they think they are capable, but their attainment doesn't necessarily yet reflect that confidence. So these learners, their goal is often to channel their positive attitude into improved outcomes. So they may need support in developing study skills, self-regulation, and to have more challenging learning opportunities to match their self-belief with their performance. The group that we're kind of going to be focusing on is the green quadrant. So they're what we call our fragile learners. So these are pupils who actually have high attainment, but they have low perceptions of their own ability. So in other words, they don't recognise how capable they are. So they are at risk of underachieving because their self-belief doesn't match that potential. So For these learners in particular, the Path Intervention Toolkit is a really great resource to provide structured, evidence-based support and help sort of build that confidence. So I'm going to pass on to Laura now, who's going to talk you through our toolkit.
Thank you so much. Yeah, as Emily mentioned there, I'm sure you can identify with some students who probably fall into each area of that quadrant, whether you teach them now or previous students. And it's about supporting those students in the right way, depending on kind of where they fall. And also, you know, it may be students outside of that perceived learning capability, but there's other areas of the past survey that are identifying some low levels of satisfaction. So when you're thinking to yourself, this is fantastic data, but what do I do next? How do I best support these students in the right way? How can I help them? Then this is your fantastic resource that is available to you with the PASS assessment. So this is our PASS interventions toolkit. As you can see on the screen, that's the PASS intervention cycle that we would recommend. So it's kind of an ongoing cycle. It never kind of comes to an end really, because there's so much that you can do when you have that data available. So what we would recommend is completing the PASS survey towards the beginning of the school year. We would always suggest allowing, I'm sure Dr. Funke would agree with this, allowing them time to settle in to the new school year. It may be a year of transition, it may be kind of examination year. So give them a few weeks to settle in and get themselves kind of feeling a little bit more familiar. And then from there, then we would suggest completing the PASS survey with your students, really, like we said, to get that insight into what's going on behind that mask. From there, then we will analyse, or the teachers will analyse the reports, and in a little while we'll talk to you about how you can, if you would like support with the analysis of your data, then we do offer one-to-one free data consultations where we're happy to talk you through and help you to identify to work out what you would like to focus on as a school. Then, dependent on what your focus area is, whether that's on a group level with a whole year group maybe, or whether it's more so with individual pupils, you can select the interventions that you feel work for you, and I'll show you some examples of that in a moment. Then with those students that you've been working with, we would suggest assessing again, and we would probably say leave at least 12 weeks between that intervention being put in place to allow time for it actually to have an impact. And then from there, then you can assess those or have a little look at the data alongside one another to see hopefully whether there's been an improvement. And it may well be that there's been a huge improvement, which is what we would like to see. It may be that it's had a little bit of an impact, or it may not necessarily have worked for that individual student. But again, that's why it's a cycle, because there's loads of other interventions and strategies that you could then try in place of that. So I'm just going to give you a sneak peek as to what it looks like. So you can access the PASS Interventions Toolkit through your TestWise account. So you'll see it on the screen there. Oh, it should have highlighted in a nice red for you, but you can see it at the bottom on that PASS Interventions. That will show on your TestWise account if you have access to our PASS assessment. You can also access it via our QR code, and hopefully we'll send you a link out into our in our follow-up email. It's available on our support site, so you can access that as well. So we'll just take a quick look at what the toolkit itself includes, so you can see why it is so valuable. So you can see each of the 9 factors there, and each of the different factors has its own page in its own right, with a wealth of information ranging from research about that factor, and I'll show you some of the other things included, but really nice and engaging, I think, to even look at to begin with. And then from there you can pick and choose, because you know you may have 8 out of the 9 factors that your students are feeling really positive about. So actually you want to just focus in on preparedness for learning, for example. So you can go into whichever of the factors is the one that you want to know about in a little bit more detail. When you click into the factors, then this is some of the information that's included. So one of the first things that I think is really, really valuable is getting a little bit of an insight as to what might this actually look like in a classroom. So for students who have a really high score, maybe for perceived learning capability, what does that actually look like on the outside for you as a teacher? And then what might actually be going on the inside for the students? And then the same for students who have a low score for that factor as well. And I think that's really valuable to get a little bit of an insight as to, you might kind of associate and think, oh yeah, that's something I have identified actually in that student. Another part that is included, again, equally as valuable are these questions to ask. And you can see that these are broken down into 3 different levels. So on a whole school level, if there's a particular factor maybe that is coming out in your data as being a concern across the whole school, there may be something that's maybe smaller groups, but a class level or maybe a year group level. And then there may be some factors that are just for specific individual students. Dependent on what level you're interested in looking at, you can click on each of these drop downs and it really gives you some valuable questions to be asking. So this is an example from a whole school. Questions to be asking as a staff, questions to be considering as their teacher, as SLT of the school, counsellors, etc. And then thinking about those questions also from the student perspective. With the individual questions as well, they may be questions that you can start that discussion with the student to find out, you know, what is it that they're actually experiencing or feeling. And then from there, I say equally as valuable, it's also valuable, but this is absolutely brilliant. For each of the factors, you will have a range of intervention strategies that have been tried, tested, that you know, schools have put into place. And you can explore these. It's not an exhaustive list. You can just have a little look in them. Like I said earlier, not all of them will fit your school context. Not all of them will be appropriate for the student that needs support. So you can pick and choose what you think may be beneficial. And like I said, it may be trial and error. You might put something into place and hope that it works, but when you reassess, you think actually it has had an impact, but I would like to have seen more. So therefore, I'm actually going to try a different intervention again. So these are really, really useful and will provide you with lots of information on how to support your students, depending on which of the factors is of greatest concern. So that's a little bit of a brief summary on what PASS is and a little sneak peek into the interventions toolkit, which I'm sure you will agree looks fantastic and is so valuable. And that's the feedback we receive from schools all across the world when we look at their data. What's going to appear on the screen now is just a little poll. All it's going to ask is if you would like any further information. So if maybe you're not using PASS currently and you would like a little bit more detail or a little bit more information, then you can select that. Maybe you're already using PASS and you like the sound of our free data consultations where we can guide you through your data analysis and support you with that. If that's the case, then please feel free to select that as well. If neither of those apply, then don't worry at all. But if you are interested in either of those, then please feel free to complete that poll for us. Thank you so much. In a moment, once we've had an opportunity for people to complete the poll, I'm going to hand you back over to Emily, and Emily's going to give you a little bit of an insight. I mentioned that schools across the world are using PASS and our interventions toolkit. They're also using Cat4 alongside that as well to identify those fragile learners. So Emily's just going to give you a little bit of insight into some of the schools who've seen great success using this product.
Thanks so much, Laura. So I'd love to highlight 2 case studies to you. So on our website, we do have a wealth of case studies for all of our products. And it's got a really simple filter system where you can pick a product maybe that you're using or a product that you're interested in, and just to learn a little bit more about how it's being used with schools maybe in your region, but also maybe schools around the world to see what success stories there have been. So I've got 2 real school stories to share with you here. We have one at Wesley College in New Zealand where they were using Cat4 plus the PASS survey for year 9 entry. And what the school did is they gained this vital baseline data before the year had even started. So what it meant is that teachers were able to meet, they were planning, and they were putting interventions and intervening from day 1. So PASS flagged students who might otherwise have slipped through the cracks, and it might not have been students that they might not necessarily have known about. We also have the Garden International School in Kuala Lumpur, where they went a step further. So they cross-matched Cat4 ability data with that PASS attitudinal data to look for their fragile learners, which we mentioned previously. So then they deployed specific interventions, so reading support, tutor-based reflection, effort recognition, and they saw these areas really improve their attainment more than the cohort average. So they're not particularly long to read, but I would really encourage you to go onto our website. These 2 case studies are great examples, but there's plenty more on there. I think the takeaway is that PASS isn't just another questionnaire. It is a tool, and it helps to enable schools to see beyond attainment, to intervene early, to support mindset and to support that self-belief. And ultimately, it's there to help students achieve their potential. We've got another resource that we'd like to show you that will hopefully show you the power and impact of PASS.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emily. As Emily mentioned there, this is a lovely video that we share. Emily's just come back from the Middle East doing in-person training, and wherever we go in the world, this is one of those videos that we really share with staff because it's very engaging and it really does show that power of PASS. It's a true story from a school in Cardiff in Wales. Where they used the PASS survey, and it's the story of Alex and how much the information they got from the PASS survey allowed them to really see this student flourish, which is what we're talking about today. And they identified it early. It was at primary level, actually, that they identified some concerns surrounding Alex and what they were able to do as a result of their results from the PASS assessment. And it's a really, it's a really nice story to read and see the impact that it can really have when we use the information from the PASS assessment in the right way to support students and to help them, as Emily said, to reach their full potential. So yeah, we will send that link over to you. So feel free, if you're doing some training with staff, or if you think, if you're using PASS, and it's a really nice one to share so that they can see the power of PASS itself.
We just want to say a huge thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear from our expert, Dr. Funke, and to be able to hear about the power of PASS from both Laura and I. We're now going to open up our Q&A, so I will pass over to Terry just to see if we've got any questions or anything that anyone would like to ask.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much to our great presenters today. That's really insightful. There isn't any questions at the moment, but we are just going to stick around for a minute or two. If you do have any questions for any of our speakers, do pop something into the Q&A. You can see the Q&A button at the bottom. Do ask us any questions you might have in there while we're here and live. It would be great to get your questions. So do pop something in there. And we'll just wait around for a couple of minutes. But while we wait, I just want to take this opportunity to thank our presenters for today, but also thank you guys for attending. We do really appreciate you coming to this event, especially joining us live. That's really great. But do put any questions in the Q&A. As I said, we will stick around just for a minute or two. If you no longer have anything else to ask, you may leave. I'm just going to hand back over to our presenters. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on while we're waiting for any questions or people leaving?
Just to kind of recap, I know we mentioned earlier in terms of the data consultations that you may be interested in. Those are really, really valuable. If you are looking at your PASS data and you're not really sure where to start with it, and maybe feeling a little bit overwhelmed, then we do offer a free one-to-one data consultation service that you can register for on our support site. You will meet with an international education advisor such as myself or Emily or one of the rest of the team, and we will sit down with you with your data, guide you through it, answer any questions that you may have, any concerns that you may have around the data. We're more than happy to help you with that. So we're available for those consultations. So please, if that's something that would be of interest, then sign up and we would love to support you.
Thank you. Okay, I think that's it. Without further ado, I think we're going to close today, unless Dr. Funke, you have anything to add, or Emily?
No, just thank you. Thank you for listening to us. And I just want to stress the importance of really being proactive in your data collection for helping students to flourish.
Brilliant. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you in future events.